In this particular lecture, we are going to understand various things related to absurd drama. In the previous lectures, we have already understood various things related to the background of modern European drama, the theater of the absurd, the idea, the school of thought as a whole. And now coming to absurd drama. After this particular understanding of absurd drama, we are going to specifically analyze two important absurd dramas. So before that, talking about absurd drama. How can we justify certain important labels, such as the theater of the absurd, that has become a catchphrase, and which was very much abused also during this particular time? There was a non-organized movement. There were no school of artists who claimed the label for themselves. A good many playwrights who have been classed under this label, they were asked if they belong to the theater of the absurd. And with this particular indifferent reply, they belong to no such movement, and quite rightly so. What each playwright concerned seeks expresses no more, no less, his personal vision of thought. These critical concepts were useful with new modes of expression, new conventions of art, and as it arose when the plays of Ionesco, Beckett, Jennett, Adamov first appeared on the stage, they puzzled and outraged most critics as well as audiences. And no wonder, these plays flout all standards by which drama has been judged for many centuries. They must therefore appear as a provocation to people who have come into the theatre expecting to find what they would recognize as a well-made play. A well-made play is expected to present characters that are well observed and convincingly motivated. These plays often contain hardly any recognizable human beings and present completely unmotivated actions. A well-made play is expected to entertain by the ding-dong of witty and logically built-up dialogue. In some of these plays, dialogue seems to have degenerated into a meaningless babble. A well-made play is expected to have a beginning, middle, and a neatly tied-up ending. These plays often start as an arbitrary point and seem to end just as arbitrarily. By all the traditional standards of critical appreciation of the drama, these plays are not only abominably bad, they do not even deserve a name drama. And yet, strangely enough, these plays have worked, they have had their effect, they have exercised a fascination of their own in the theatre. At first, it was said that this fascination was merely a success, the scandal, that people flocked to see Beckett's Waiting for Godot or Ionesco's Bald Prima Donna, merely because it had become fashionable to express outrage and astonishment about them at parties. But this explanation clearly could not apply to more than one or two plays of the kind. And the success of the whole row of similarly unconventional works became more and more manifest. If the critical touchstones of conventional drama did not apply to this plays, this must surely have been due to difference in objective, the use of different artistic means, to the fact, in short, that these plays were both creating and applying in different convention of drama. It is just as senseless to condemn an abstract painting because it lacks perspective or a recognizable subject matter as it is to reject Waiting for Godot because it has no plot to speak of. In a painting, a composition of squares and lines, an artist like Mondrian does not want to depict any object in nature. He does not want to create perspective. Similarly, in writing Waiting for Godot, Beckett did not intend to tell a story. He did not want the audience to go home satisfied that they knew the solution to the problem posed in the play. Hence, there is no point in reproaching him with not doing what he ever sought to do. The only reasonable course is to try and find out what it was that he did intend. Yet, if tackled directly, most of the playwrights in question would refuse to discuss any theories or objectives behind the work. They would, with perfect justification, point out that they are concerned with one thing only: to express their vision of the world as best they can, simply because, as artists, they feel an irrepressible urge to do so. This is where the critic can step in. By describing the works that do not fit into the established convention, by bringing out the similarities of approach in number of more or less obviously related new works, by analyzing the nature of their method and their artistic effect, he can try to define the framework of the new convention, and by doing so, can provide the standards by which it will become possible to have works in that convention meaningfully compared and evaluated. The onus of proof that there is such a convention involved clearly that lies on the critic. But if he can establish that there are basic similarities in approach, he can argue that the similarities must arise from common factors in the experience of writers concerned. And these common factors must in turn spring from spiritual climate of our age, which no sensitive artist can escape, and also perhaps from a common background of artistic influences, a similarity of roots, a shared tradition. A term like the absurd drama must therefore be understood as a kind of intellectual shorthand for a complex pattern of similarities in approach, method, and convention, of shared philosophical and artistic premises, where conscious or subconscious, and of influences from a common store of tradition. A label of this kind, therefore, is an aid to understanding, valid only insofar as it helps to gain insight into a work of art. It is not a binding classification. It is certainly not all embracing or exclusive. A play may contain some elements that can be understood in the light of such a label, while other elements in the same play derive from and can best be understood in light of a different convention. Arthur Adamov, for example, had written a number of plays that are prime examples of the theatre of absurd. He now quite openly and consciously rejected this particular style and had written in a different realistic convention. Nevertheless, even his latest plays, which are both realistic and socially committed, contain some aspects which can still be elucidated in terms of the theatre of absurd, such as the use of symbolic interludes, withdrawals in his play Spring 71. Moreover, once a term like the theatre of the absurd is defined and understood, it acquires a certain value in throwing light on works of previous epochs. The Polish critic Jan Kott, for example, had written a brilliant study of King Lear in the light of Beckett's Endgame, and that this was no vain academic exercise but a genuine aid to understanding, and is shown by the fact that Peter Brook's great production of King Lear took many of its ideas from Kott's essays. Here we can ask that this entire convention of drama has now acquired the level of the theatre of absurd. In order to answer this pertinent question, we can take an important play in this understanding, Ionesco's Amelie. A middle-aged husband and wife are shown in a situation which is clearly not taken from real life. They have not left their flat for years. The wife earns by operating some sort of telephone switchboard. The husband is writing a play but has never got beyond the first few lines. In the bedroom, there is a corpse. It has been there for many years. It may be the corpse of the wife's lover, whom the husband killed when he found them together. But this is by no means certain. It may have also been a burglar or a stray visitor. But the oddest thing about it is that it keeps growing larger and larger. It is suffering from geometric progression, the incurable disease of the dead. And in the course of the play, it grows so large that eventually an enormous foot bursts from the bedroom into the living. This particular room that is threatened to drive Amite and his wife out of their home. All this in wildly fantastic, yet it is not altogether unfamiliar, for it is not unlike situations most of us have experienced at one time or other in dreams and nightmares. UNESCO has in fact put a dream situation onto the stage, and in a dream, quite clearly, the rules of realistic theatre no longer apply. Dreams do not develop logically, they develop by association. Dreams do not communicate ideas, they communicate images. And indeed, the glowing corpse in Amide can best be understood as a poetic image. It is in the nature both of dreams and poetic imagery that they are ambiguous and carry a multitude of meanings at one and at the same time, so that it is futile to ask what the image of the glowing corpse stands for. On the other hand, one can say that the corpse might evoke the growing power of the past mistakes or past guilt, perhaps the waning of love or the death of affection. Some evil in any case that festers and grows worse with time. The image can stand for any and all of these ideas, and its ability to embrace them all gives it the poetic power it undoubtedly possesses. Not all the plays of the theatre of the absurd can be described simply as dreams, although Adamov's Professor Taran in this entire volume actually came out to Adamov as a dream. Albie's zoo story is clearly far more firmly anchored in reality, but in all of them, the poetic image is the focus of interest. In other words, while most plays in the traditional convention are primarily concerned to tell us or elucidate an intellectual problem, it can be seen as a narrative or discursive form of communication. The plays of the theatre of the absurd are primarily intended to convey a poetic image or a complex pattern of poetic images. They are all above the poetic form. Narrative or discursive thought proceeds in a dialectical manner and must lead to a result or final message. It is therefore dynamic and moves along a definite line of development. Poetry is above all the concern that is very much in its way of conveying the central idea or atmosphere or mode of being. It is essentially static. This does not mean, however, that these plays lack movement. The movement in Amite, for instance, is relentless, lying as it does in the pressure of the ever-growing corpse. But the situation of the play remains static. The movement we see in unfolding of the poetic image. The more ambiguous and complex that image, the more intricate and intriguing will the process of revealing it. This is why a play like Waiting for Godot can generate considerable suspense and dramatic tension, in spite of being a play which is in which literally nothing happens. A play designed to show that nothing can ever happen in human life. It is only when the last lines have been spoken and the curtain has fallen that we are in a position to grasp the total pattern of the complex poetic image we have been confronted with. If in the traditional play, the action goes beyond the point A to point B and we constantly ask what's going to happen next. Here we have an action that consists in the gradual unfolding of a complex pattern. And we instead ask, what is it that we are seeking? What will the completed image be when we have grasped the nature of the pattern? Thus, in Arabels, the two executioners in this volume, we realize at the end of the play that the theme is the exploration of a complex image of mother-son relationship. In Albia's zoo story, it is only in the last lines of the play that the idea of the entire dialogue between Jerry and Peter falls into place. As an image of the difficulty of communication between human beings in our world. Why should the emphasis in drama have shifted away from the traditional forms towards images, which, complex and suggestive as they may be, must necessarily lack the final clarity of definition? The neat resolutions we have been used to expect, clearly because the playwrights concerned no longer believe in the possibility of such neatness of resolution. They are indeed chiefly concerned with expressing a sense of wonder, of incomprehension, and at times of despair at the lack of cohesion and meaning that they find in the world. If they could believe in clearly defined motivations, acceptable solutions, settlements of conflict, in tidily tied up endings, these dramatists would certainly not eschew them. But quite obviously, they have no faith in the existence of so rational and well ordered a universe. The well made play can thus be seen as conditioned by clear and comforting beliefs, as a table scale of values, an ethical system in full working condition. The system of values, the world view behind the well made play, may be a religious one or a political one. It may be an implicit belief in the goodness and the perfectibility of men, as in Shaw or Ibsen, or it may be a mere unthinking of acceptance of the moral and political status quo, as in most drawing room comedy. But whatever it is, the basis of the well made play is the implicit assumption that the world does make sense, that reality is solid and secure, all outlines clear, all ends apparent. The plays that we have classed under the label of the theatre of absurd, on the other hand, express a sense of shock at the absence, the loss of any such clear and well-defined systems of beliefs or values. This can little doubt that such a sense of disillusionment, such a collapse of all previously held firm beliefs, is a characteristic feature of our own times. The social and spiritual results for such a sense of loss of meaning are manifold and complex. The waning of religious faith that had started with the Enlightenment and led Nietzsche to speak of the death of God by the 1880s, the breakdown of the liberal faith is inevitable social progress in the wake of the First World War. The disillusionment with the hopes of radical social revolution, as predicted by Marx after Stalin, had turned Soviet Union into a totalitarian tyranny. The relapse into barbarism, mass murder, and genocide in the course of Hitler's brief rule over Europe during the Second World War. And in the aftermath of that war, the spread of spiritual emptiness in the outwardly prosperous and affluent societies of Western Europe and the United States. There can be no doubt, for many intelligent and insensitive human beings, the world of the mid 20th century has lost its meaning and has simply ceased to make sense. Previously held certainties have dissolved. The firmest foundations for hope and optimism have collapsed. Suddenly, man sees himself faced with a universe that is both frightening and illogical. In a word, absurd. All assurances of hope, all explanations of ultimate meaning that have suddenly been unmasked as nonsensical illusions, empty chatter, whistling in the dark. If we try to imagine such a situation in ordinary life, this might amount to our suddenly ceasing to understanding the conversation in a room full of people. What made sense at one moment has at the next become an obscure babble of voices in a foreign language. At once, the comforting familiar scene would turn into one of that of nightmare and horror. With the loss of the means of communication, we should be compelled to view that the world with the eyes of the total outsiders as a succession of frightening images. Such a sense of loss of meaning must evidently lead to a questioning of recognized instrument for the communication of meaning, language. Consequently, the theatre of absurd is to a very considerable extent concerned with the critique of language, an attack above all on fossilized forms of language which have become devoid of meaning. The conversation at the party, which one moment seemed to be an exchange of information about the weather or new books or the respective health of participants, is suddenly revealed as an exchange of mere meaningless banalities. The people talking about the weather had no intention whatever of really exchanging meaningful information on the subject. They were merely using language to fill the emptiness between them, to conceal the fact that they had no desire to tell each other anything at all. In other words, from being a noble instrument of genuine communication, language had become a kind of ballast filling empty spaces. And equally, in a universe that seems to be drained of meaning, the pompous and the laborious attempts at explanation we call philosophy or politics must appear as empty chatter. In Waiting for Godot, for example, Beckett parodies and mocks the language of philosophy and science in Lucky's famous speech. Harold Pinter, whose uncanny accuracy in the reproduction of real conversation among English people has earned him the reputation of having a tape recorder built into his memory, reveals that the bulk of everyday conversation is largely devoid of logic and sense, is in fact nonsensical. It is at this point that the absurd drama can actually coincide with the highest degree of realism. For if the real conversation of human beings is in fact absurd and nonsensical, then it is the well-made play with its polished logical dialogue that is unrealistic. While the absurdist play may well be a tape-recorded reproduction of reality, or in a world that has become absurd, the theatre of the absurd is the most realistic comment on the most accurate reproduction of reality. In this critique of language, the theatre of the absurd closely reflects the preoccupation of contemporary philosophy with language, its effort to disentangle language as a genuine instrument for logic and the discovery of reality from the welter of emotive, illogical usages, the grammatic conventions that have in the past often been confused with genuine logical relationships, and equally in its emphasis on the basic absurdity of human condition, on the bankruptcy of all closed systems of thought with claims to provide a total explanation of reality. The theatre of the absurd has much in common with the existential philosophy of Heidegger, Sartre, and Camus. It was, in fact, Camus who coined the concept of absurd in the sense in which it is used in this particular understanding. It is not to say that the dramatists of the absurd they were trying to translate the contemporary philosophy into drama. It is merely that the philosophers and dramatists responded to the same cultural and spiritual situation and reflected the same preoccupations. However, in the contemporary theatre of the absurd, it may appear that it is by no means the revolutionary novelty, as with some of the champions and one of the bitterest critics they tend to represent it. In fact, the absurd drama can best be understood as a new combination of a number of ancient, even archaic traditions of literature and drama. It is surprising and shocking merely because of the unusual nature of the combination and the increased emphasis on aspects of drama that, while present in all plays, rarely emerge into the foreground. The ancient traditions combined in a new form in the theatre of the absurd, which included the tradition of miming and clowning that goes back to the mimes of Greece and Rome, the commedia dell'arte of Renaissance Italy, and such popular forms of theatre as the pantomime or music hall in Britain. The equally ancient tradition of nonsense poetry, the tradition of dream and the nightmare literature that also goes back to Greek and Roman times. Allegorical and symbolic drama, such as we find it in medieval morality plays, or in the Spanish auto sacramental, the ancient tradition of fools and mad scenes in drama, of which Shakespeare provides a multitude of examples, and the even more ancient tradition of ritual drama that goes back to the very origins of theatre, where religion and drama were still one. It is no coincidence that one of the masters of the theatre of absurd, Jean Genet, regard his plays as attempts at recapturing the ritual element in the mass itself, which, after all, can be seen as a poetic image of an archetypal, even brought to light through a sequence of symbolic actions. It is against this background that we must see the history of the movement, which culminates in Beckett, Ionesco, or Genet. Its immediate forebears are dramatists like Strindberg, who progressed from photographic naturalism to more and more openly expressionist representations of dreams, nightmares, or obsessions in plays like Ghost Sonata, Dream Play, or To Damascus, and novelists like James Joyce and Kafka. A form of drama concerned with dreamlike imagery and the failure of language were bound to find inspiration also in silent cinema, with its dreamlike quality and cruel, sometimes nightmare humor. Charlie Chaplin's Little Man and Buster Keaton's Stone-Faced Stoic are among the openly acknowledged influences of writers like Beckett and Ionesco. These comedians, after all, derived from the most ancient traditions of clowning, as do in the talking cinema. The Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, or Laurel and Hardy, all clearly part of the tradition which leads to the absurd drama. Another direct and acknowledged influence, that is, of the Dadaists, the Surrealists, and the Parisian avant-garde, that derives from the writers such as Alfred Jarry and Guilan Apollinaire. Jarry's Uburoi, first performed in 1896, might in fact be called the first modern example of the theatre of the absurd. It is a savage farce in which monstrous puppets castigate the greed and emptiness of bourgeois society through a series of grotesque images. Apollonaire's play, La Mamelles de Tiresias, The Breasts of Tiresias, was the first play to be labeled by its author as a surrealist drama. Here too, the action proceeds through a series of savagely grotesque images, the hero, or rather the heroine. On the other hand, if we talk about Jarry and Apollinaire, the direct precursors of the Dadaists in Switzerland, France, and Germany, Brecht's earliest plays bear the marks of Dadaist influence and can be regarded as early examples of the theatre of the absurd. In the jungle of the cities, for instance, presents the audience with a totally unmotivated struggle a series of poetic images of man fighting a senseless battle with himself. In the present form, the absurdist theatre is a post-war phenomenon. Genet's The Maids had its first performance in the Athene in Paris in 1947, Beckett's Waiting for Godot in 1952. We find that the equally strange and significant playwrights themselves are largely exiles from their domiciliated countries and very much evoking out the specific aura of the dramas as they fall under the purview of the theatre of the absurd. Absurdist dramatists Samuel Beckett, Harold Pinter, and other important playwrights will be our primary focus of concern as we move on to the next lectures, wherein in two particular parts, I'm going to elaborate on Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot and Harold Pinter's work, because these are regarded to be the primary works based on the absurdist ideologies. Thank you.